At 60 years old, the body begins to fade. This is an inevitable law of nature. However, by reaching the peak of internal energy, a miracle occurs, the divine rebirth of the earthly body. Bones and muscles are rebuilt to achieve the highest form of martial arts, and the withered body returns to its former youth. This is the highest achievement that people strive for. The divine sect called it divine awakening, and the shadow sect called this phenomenon demonic discipline. In the divine sect, 8 people had achieved divine awakening. At the same time, 4 from the shadow sect had achieved demonic discipline. Above them stood only masters from the divine realm, whose bodies were immune to poisons and diseases. For 1,000 years there was only one among the Murim masters. A traditional tea ceremony took place in one of the palaces, in which a master who had achieved divine awakening asked a stranger what a sword meant to him. He answered him that this was an excellent murder weapon, with sharp edges. However, it is what it is. A martial art is a martial art, a sword is a sword, and morals are morals. Deep in the dungeon, a mysterious demonic rite was taking place. Ban came there to fight the master of the Crimson Awakening. He took off his dragon head shoulder pads. Ban was truly honored by the opportunity given to him. A master highly skilled in sword art could even assess the situation with his eyes closed. Opening his eyes, he saw not only the master of the Crimson Awakening, there were also his comrades there. Ban realized that the new ability of connecting the soul with the undead was being used against him. The master ordered his comrades to surround Ban with a great demonic containment field. The companions' eyes became bloodshot, and they used demonic seals to attack. It would seem that Ban could no longer escape. 1,000 demons attacked him at once, but they forgot that they were attacking a real master of the dark arts. Ban used his famous whirlwind-piercing technique. The basis of the swordsman's energy was inviolability itself. He defeated 1,000 comrades in just one moment after using his ability. Unperturbed, Ban headed straight towards the cultist. He was not afraid of a Ban. He grinned right in the swordsman's face. Is he really going to use this ability right here and now? The enemies defeated by the swordsman immediately rose from the dead, but they were without flesh. Ban found himself in the midst of an ability that was unfamiliar to him. It was an unholy ritual of soul torture. The swordsman felt that the ground beneath him began to tremble. Even such an experienced martial artist could not assess the situation while in free fall. Without hesitation, thousands of necromancers attacked the swordsman again at once. Ban fell. The Crimson Awakening Master looked at his body from the shadows. He took his sword, hoping that it would take away the Ban's power. He was pleased that everything went as he had planned. Using a lightning-fast blade throw, he betrayed his demonic ally. He did not expect this from the Master. The blade went right through his neck. No one knew what the Master of the Crimson Awakening was really up to. Ban's bloody sword. No one knows what power it contains. The Master revealed his true goal, because the second living master of the ardent demon was killed. Now he must lead the school of dark arts and conquer all of Murim. All that was left of Ban was his robe. He died. The land of Murim, full of mystical creatures, is a fascinating sight. Suddenly, a bolt from the blue, an unusual phenomenon for this land. Everything is as if in a fog, a storm that sent a sunset of thunder onto the earth. Among the smoke, a human silhouette appeared. Who was it? It was none other than a sword master reincarnated from the other world. Not understanding what happened to him, he looked up, searching for an answer. Ben didn't understand where he was and where the connection between his soul and the undead was. Souls with the undead, those comrades who used this ability, which killed Ban. Clarity comes to mind, memories came gradually, but at the same time very quickly. What did those scum of the bloody arts do to Ban? The master also remembered the lost sword. But first you need to get clothes in the nearest village. Having used his high jump ability, he suddenly remembered that he first used this naked elevation technique. Sunset all alone, sitting on a tree, Ban thought. Hanging upside down, he experienced hunger, and 2 hours of searching for the village were fruitless. Ben came up with the idea of covering himself with the skin of an animal. In the forest, the swordsman came across a forest troll. He looked like a mythical creature from legends. A green creature with huge fangs was not averse to profiting from a person. The whistle went through like a bullet, but didn't go all the way through. What was it? It was Ban's shot. Thanks to his skill and ability, he could even shoot it with his finger. The swordsman noticed that something was wrong. He could not miss. The shot was right on target. The forest troll's wound was healing. But how? Was it really regeneration? But the amazing power of the mystical creature did not stop Ban, and he began to act. The master's hands cut like a blade, This is one of Ban's abilities. The troll clearly did not expect this. But is he really able to regenerate even after such a blow? The troll's wound healed again. The body of the creature that received such damage regenerated again. Ban remembered the words of the sage: to survive, there was one technique that was superior to others. A blow of vital energy that will not leave a chance for the forest ogre. But the troll did not need to be destroyed. Ban wanted to try to fry it. The 3-meter forest ogre did not even have time to blink an eye before the master disappeared from sight. Hands cut like a sword, a troll's head from the shoulders. Upon landing after a successful attack, Ban notices something unusual. The ogre had green blood, perhaps because he is a mystical creature. After defeating the troll, Ban, without thinking twice, lit a fire and began to fry the ogre. The master thought, for some reason the forest creature did not have a soul stone, maybe he was still young. But in any case, Ban heard that the meat of a mystical creature has a beneficial effect on health. But it didn't taste very good, and it smelled even worse. Somewhere in the middle of the mountain range, Ban again remembered that there were no people nearby, not even their traces. Breathtaking scenery, clean air, cool night breeze, even the moons are shining. Having looked closely, Ban jumped up. Didn't he really think he was in the sky? There were 2 moons, a phenomenon the sword master had never seen before. There was an empire called Kratos on this new land, in the castle of which there was a morning feast, at which something was usually discussed. The dark-haired lord silently watched the king eat breakfast. Afterwards he turned to his majesty, who was still enjoying breakfast. The lord begged the young king to eat normally rather than eat breakfast like a commoner. The king slammed his steel cup down on the table and turned to the lord. The king told the lord that they had lost most of the empire's lands. The lord wanted his majesty to eat healthy food, but he ordered him to shut up. The lord told the news that Corinth was sending an ambassador to them. He thinks that they want them to clear the land of mythical creatures. The young master thought about the lord's words and wanted to find his own benefit in this proposal. After all, his army was battle-hardened. The military skill of the past emperor was hidden by his own suicide. The young emperor expressed himself so rudely that he almost broke the table. His Majesty Frank von Great considered such options to fuel the fire for future revenge. After 2 years of Ban's wanderings, while walking through the forest, he came across someone's house. He found it strange, because he had never seen such houses. A guard dog, black and white in color, ran out towards the master of the dark arts. But the puppy did not attack him, but only stepped on the Ban's leg with its paw. The dog barked, which apparently confused the residents of the forest house. Ban did not expect to see anyone. A little girl came out of the house and saw a stranger next to her faithful friend. The blue-eyed girl asked the stranger who he was and what he was doing here. Ban was confused. The first thing he thought about was whether she could pose a danger to him. The master of the dark arts did not understand a word of the little girl, who in turn noticed that he was wearing clothes made from a mythical creature. Following the girl, her mother ran out, thinking that her child was in danger. Ban immediately wanted to apologize, but remembered that they wouldn't understand a word he said. The mother said that they had nothing for him, and if he was planning something bad, she threatened the stranger that her husband and son would soon return home. Ban, who took the dog in his arms, stood thinking that they did not look like the pale-skinned ones from his past world. The girl, in turn, told her mother that he did not look like a villain. The master of the dark arts pointed his finger at his mother, and the woman, in bewilderment, also pointed her finger at herself. Ban then pointed with both hands at his clothes. None of them understood each other, what he wanted to say by this. The imperturbable Ban didn't know if they could understand him in sign language. The evil mother said that the stranger showed his true nature and asked the girl to quickly call her father, but she replied that she thought that the uncle asked for some clothes. While they stood and wondered whether they were each other's enemies or not, the little puppy lay down on the ground and fell asleep. Having come to the general conclusion that they were not enemies with each other, Ben thought about the name of the girl. Her name was Taria. He had never heard such names in his lands before. He was also given clothes that he considered strange. The mother praised the swordsman. The clothes she gave him looked very good on him, for which Ban thanked her, with a gesture of hands from his past world. The sword master turned sharply and walked in the other direction. This surprised the mother and the girl and perhaps made her a little wary. Ben approached the place where his father usually chopped wood and picked up an axe, which made his mother ask Taria to quickly call her father. The master of dark arts only wanted to thank the family who gave him clothes. The woman breathed a sigh of relief. Taria shouted "Uncle," which made Ban stop chopping wood. The sword master still did not understand their language. The blue-eyed girl only noted that he was very strong, because she had never seen wood chopped with one hand. Ban turned to Teria in his native language. He wanted to know what kind of tool he was using to chop wood, but they didn't understand him just like he did them. The mother again became a little wary because next to her daughter stood a stranger with an axe. The girl's eyes sparkled, because she was interested in explaining to the stranger what firewood was and what an axe was. Ban looked at Teria in surprise and repeated words unknown to him, from which the girl's interest became even more intense. She asked the wanderer to ask her something else, because she so wanted to teach him her language. Ben thought to himself that he should not rush into anything, because now the most important thing for him was to learn to speak a foreign language. 2 years later, while traveling and exploring a new world, the master of the dark arts learned the local language and came to a local resident for one thing. Stretching out his hand, the man said that this was a map of these lands, which he had been looking for a long time. Ben curiously snatched the card from the man's hands and thanked him. But then he encountered a difficulty. He learned the language, but still had problems with reading. The man noticed this and made fun of Ban a little, saying that it's okay, he still has everything ahead of him. To which the master of the dark arts lied a little, saying that he understood well what was written there. The man encouraged Ban, because it would seem that just yesterday the swordsman was diligently gesticulating to explain what he wanted. Ben replied that it was all thanks to Mr. Blair's family, because the blue-eyed girl couldn't get enough of talking to him. Ben was chopping wood and thought to himself that not only was this a great map geographically, but there were also unique features of the village. The logs flew one after another, and the master of the dark arts kept thinking about his past, his dark past. Ben must come to terms with the circumstances in which he finds himself. He has no other choice but to accept it. How to accept the fact that he cannot return to Murim only through the technique of great exaltation. Even while thinking, he mechanically continued to chop wood, one of which almost hit Teria, who came too close. Ben told the girl that it was dangerous here, she should move away. Looking at him, the girl called the swordsman with a nickname that she herself invented. She called him Dark. To which the master of the dark arts replied that he had already told her that his name was Ban, not Dark. This made Teria laugh very much, because in her native language the name Ban means dark smell. She laughed so much that she thought she would die laughing. The joyful child pointed her finger at the master of the dark arts and said Dark, causing Ban to fall into a stupor from Teria's insistence. The blue-eyed girl noticed that the name Dark fits his black eyes and hair perfectly. Ben answered Teria that she could call him whatever she wanted, as long as she stayed behind and did not interfere with his work. Deciding to rest a little, Ben leaned his elbows on the ground and asked the girl what a mercenary was, and she answered him that these are people who fight for money. Is she really comparing him to an assassin? The master of the dark arts thought. He answered her that he was not like them. Surprised, Teria looked straight into Ban's eyes. She asked him who he was then, if he was not a mercenary or an assassin. Sighing, the swordsman answered the little girl that he was a master of the school of dark arts who only wanted to find his way home. Blue-eyed, Teria said, why don't Ban look for a job in the mercenary guild? The mercenary guild is a place where mercenaries gather, where they receive orders and trade information. Ben thought about Teria's words. He definitely needed to get at least some information in order to return home. And he also asked her how she knew about the mercenary guild. The girl told the master of the dark arts that her brother ran away from home, saying that he would become a mercenary. But his father found him and brought him back. This story made Ban laugh very much. The king inspected his lands from the highest point of his castle, but suddenly he notices that one of his subjects is heading towards him. It was Captain Ragnar. Perhaps he came with good news. He asked the king not to worry. The young ruler replied that he could not calm down, because he needed to send 2,000 palace maids to the needs of the Corinth. From what was said, without noticing it, he bit his lip very hard, because these were his people. The captain replied that all they could do was increase their combat power in order to resist the Corinth. The king's anxiety would only increase if the ruler thought about such mundane problems as this. Angry, the emperor asked Ragnar if the maids were ready to leave. The captain replied that in a week they would be delivered to the Corinth. Do not forget that there was such a case that 10 years ago the Corinth kidnapped the maids and demanded new ones. The captain asked the king to be calm, because he would lead the escort. Looking to the side, the emperor and Ragnar noticed a silhouette walking towards them. It was Lord Tozer. They were wondering what news he came with. Bowing his head down, the Lord said that he had failed the task given to him. The Emperor noted that this was the 5th time the Lord had failed in his task, and also asked if the Amphiro's journal was of any use. The Amphiro's journal does not contain information about the Axion of the past, only a little about its research. The kingdom knows the theory, but they cannot yet do detailed experiments. However, the Lord said that 90% of the theory is already ready. He will do his best to fill in the missing 10% of the information. Turning to the Emperor, the Lord begged to give him a little more time to study, to which the king replied that he would give him one last chance. The king still has hope in his eyes that with the help of this artifact he can provide a better life for his empire. For Mr. Blair's family, the news was not so happy. Ben decided to leave. Mother and children were very saddened by this event, because they had become so close lately. Stretching out his hand to shake hands with the head of the family, the master of the dark arts jokingly asked for forgiveness for being a burden all this time, to which Mr. Blair replied to Ben that he was mistaken. He had become part of the family for them, and he could always return no matter what happened. To which the master of the dark arts replied that he learned the culture of this world, and this brought him great benefit. During the farewell process, the son asked his father for permission to go on a journey with Ben, because the boy still had an unfulfilled dream of becoming a mercenary. To which the head of the family threatened the boy that if he ran away again, he would rake in twice as much as before. To which the boy replied that he was missing the best chance in life, to become not a simple farmer, but a mercenary. Ben, who got down on one knee, did not forget to say goodbye to his noticeably grown four-legged friend, who even shed his stingy dog tear in farewell. A small blue-eyed girl walked up to the swordsman and grabbed his clothes with one hand. Sadness was evident in her eyes. Taria said that her beloved Dark would regret leaving, because if he stayed and waited a few more years, he would have a sweet bride. It seems that Ben has never been so embarrassed in his life as after what the little blue-eyed girl said. The master of the dark arts told her that, unfortunately, their age difference was too big, and he also did not want to be beaten by her father. Finally, Ben said that he did not know if they would meet again, but he would never forget her. After all, Taria was the one who gave the swordsman his name, Dark. The master of the dark arts patted the little blue-eyed girl on the head, who in turn burst into tears from the grief of the upcoming separation. The head of the family and the mother and the dog silently watched one of the family members leave. The four-legged one even somehow waved a handkerchief to his departing friend. There is no turning back, Ben thought to himself, and began to walk away little by little, but with a confident gait. The dog barked at the top of his voice, the children waved their arms and shouted after their departing friend. The head of the family and mother froze in place and silently looked at their son, one might say, leaving. Ben turned for the last time to his family, who helped him in any way they could. But he has a long way ahead, his main goal being to return to Murim. When leaving, Ben also duplicated the gesture with his hands, which in these lands meant farewell, after which he turned around and continued to wander on his long journey. It was night. The sky was covered with the twinkling of stars. In the sky there was also a rare phenomenon for this world, when the second moon had not yet had time to join the other, because in these lands there were two of them. In the darkness of the night, a silhouette can be seen sitting by the fire, waiting for dinner to be prepared. Suddenly, unexpectedly, in the bushes of pitch darkness, red, as if bloodshot, eyes began to glow. Having waited for the delicacy to be prepared, the swordsman immediately began to eat it. Still, noticing that he was being watched, Ben did not show any sign. His senses and vision never failed him. At that very second, the enemy appeared before the master of the dark arts. They were werewolves, with huge fangs and claws, thirsting for only one thing: fresh human flesh. Possessing only one thirst for blood, the werewolves decided that the swordsman would be an easy target for them, and immediately went on the attack. Ben was ready for anything, but he clearly did not expect such speed from a mystical creature. The enemy was very fast. After successfully dodging the enemy's attack with his elevation ability, the master finally understood why people always avoid this mountain. The master of the dark arts assessed the situation and decided to launch a counterattack, using his famous striking hand technique. He clearly caught the beast off guard with his powerful attack. But at this stage of his journey, the swordsman already knew that mystical creatures have regeneration. Unperturbed, Ben gathered together all the power of dark energy for the final attack. The regenerating beast, which clearly failed to assess the situation and the abilities of the one it attacked, could only rely on its instincts to growl and bare its fangs in the face of the enemy. With a slight movement of his hand, Ban, who had accumulated the energy for the attack, left a shining mark in the form of a palm on the beast's chest, which was fatal for the werewolf. The rest of the mystical creatures clearly did not expect this, watching as their leader flew away a couple of tens of meters. The beasts roared their war cry in hopes of intimidating the sword master. Ban, in turn, only thought about what a good mannequin would be for the school of bloody arts. The beast could even make a good carpet. Noticing that the man was not the least bit scared, the mystical creatures seemed to read his thoughts and rushed away, abandoning their dead leader. The evil master, looking towards the fleeing creatures, did not understand what the point was in attacking him, because he only dropped the freshly cooked meat in vain. Gritting his teeth, Ban picked up the body of the dead werewolf, because why should something good disappear? This beast also looks good on a flaming spit, Ban thought. The emperor, sitting on the throne, rested his head on his hand, crossed his legs and apparently expected at least some good news. Lord Tozer came with news to the young king, saying that this was very urgent information. He told the emperor that they had an excellent opportunity to take possession of the dragon's heart. Jumping from his throne, the young king was eager for the smallest details and could no longer wait for the lord to tell in detail. Tozer told the emperor that the dragon's heart was kept in the great Drow temple in Corinth. They also reported from the front that the Trovian Empire would borrow it for some time. The king said that they must intercept it at any cost. After all, the dragon's heart was a huge clot of dense and pure mana, and the lord also said that he thought that the protection of the artifact would be weak. Tozer said that the Corinthian Empire believes that no one would even dare to encroach on such an artifact. The emperor asked the lord how weak the security is there, that Tozer makes such bold statements. The lord answered the young king that, citing information, there are only 50 knights guarding the heart, and only one master, adding that the master does not even have titanium. The emperor thought, a master without titanium, perhaps this is a deliberate leak of information from the Corinth. Without a doubt, this is reliable information. The young king gave the order to act immediately. Wandering between forests, mountains and rivers, the sword master moves forward in search of any information. Along the way, he noticed that the new land for him was undoubtedly richer in oxygen than near him. He had never felt such powerful forest energy. Looking at his hands, he thought that every little bit of energy was restored almost immediately. This would make it much easier for anyone to practice and master martial arts. The swordsman also wondered what kind of martial arts were practiced here. Suddenly, unexpectedly, a fair-haired girl appears on his way, screaming for the traveler to stop. The young girl asked where the traveler was going. The master of the dark arts answered her that he was on his way to Vulcania, and in response he heard a demand for payment of 10 silver coins. Stunned by the impudence of the stranger, the sword master grinned sarcastically in her face, answering that the price was too high, because his clothes cost only 7 silver coins. To which Ban heard in response that if he has nothing to pay him with, then let him try swimming, maybe he will succeed. The master of the dark arts just laughed in the girl's face and found her words very funny. As if in an instant, he rushed past, asking if she was sure of her words. The young girl, in turn, took this for humiliation and instantly exposed her blade in order to cut the sword master. But the stupid stranger didn't know who she was trying to raise her sword against. Ban stopped the attack attempt in a matter of seconds, grabbing the attacker's hand and squeezing it tightly. Then, with a deft movement, he moved his hand to the neck of the blue-eyed robber, from which she blushed, and in this position could only wheeze. Ben asked her how much money she had. She replied that she had nothing at all. That's why she was robbing. But the sword master made it clear with just one glance that he did not intend to listen to lies. Very frightened, the stupid girl only had time to wonder what the dark-haired wanderer would do to her. Staring furiously at her own helplessness, the bound robber, left without part of her clothing, kept nagging Ban with her gaze. Not a bad catch. On the way to Vulcania, Ban thought, these clothes are probably worth something. Also, he did not ignore such a trophy as a sword. Perhaps it will remain with him. The girl can only think about her actions, because she couldn't even do anything. After a long silence, she asked to be released, to which the imperturbable Ban told her that he would let her go for 10 silver coins. To which the girl, in a fit of anger, replied that he was a stranger and had already taken her clothes and that she really had no money. The master of the dark arts decided to check if the girl was lying to him. With one hand he lifted her up, starting to shake her, in an attempt to hear the clink of coins. But she actually didn't have any money. To which the unshakable Ban replied that since there were no coins, he would have to swim. The robber's eyes widened in fear. With one left sword the swordsman threw her straight into the bay. The girl, in turn, screamed very loudly, threatening with a promise that someday they will meet again, and this meeting will become fatal for the master of the dark arts. In response to cries of reprisals, Ben simply waved goodbye. Further actions will take place in the city of Vulcania, where in one of the local pubs, a wanderer idolized local alcohol. Suddenly, he did not deliberately overhear a conversation at the next table about an unknown place through which the path to Chainan lies. With one eye, Ban analyzed that these were apparently ordinary people who were also drinking fresh, tasty ale. One of them told Meaty that she looked as if she had never been to these lands and that it would be much faster to go through the gate. The red-haired girl, in turn, replied that there was a dragon's lair there, a very strong dragon. Observing and eavesdropping on the conversation, the traveler was very interested in listening to it to the end. At the table they suggested ending the argument and continuing to enjoy the fresh drink. The guy in the red robe asked his friend if he had ever seen dragons before. After a pause, the swordsman nevertheless dared to ask the company opposite if he had misheard that they were heading to Chainan. The answer was positive. One of them asked how he could help the stranger. Ben told them that he was also on his way to Chainan, but he did not know how to get there and asked permission if he could continue his journey in their company. After thinking about it, the reasonable guy weighed the pros and cons. Having said that he thought it would be difficult to travel with the saber that the Ban had, he also asked the Ban why he needed the sword, perhaps to fight monsters. The stranger also added that the saber blade would not even pierce the skin of a monster, not to mention a beast, because this weapon is intended for duels against people. The guy from the company also noted that these weapons are most often used by women for self-defense, asking Ban if this is definitely his weapon. Ben immediately realized that the guy looked experienced. He would be good as a companion. In turn, the master of the dark arts promised that he would not become a burden on the journey, after asking permission to examine the guy's sword. The guy did not refuse the wanderer's request and handed him the sword, but something alerted Ban. The master of the dark arts saw something particularly familiar in the sword. The guy noted the dark-haired traveler's good observation skills, asking him how he realized that this sword was magical. The stranger's words misled Ban. He did not quite understand what he was talking about. Having become like an idol, the swordsman, who is a master of the dark arts, turned to the company with the question of what a magic sword is. The guy looked at him and asked the stranger a question if he really didn't know what kind of sword it was. Ben explained that before this he lived in a village and with eyes full of curiosity, asked for an explanation. The answer was as simple as possible, because it is a weapon that can use spells. Adding to the answer, the guy also said that you can use it exclusively for spells with which the sword was enchanted, and it also absorbs a large amount of mana. But this is a huge privilege for using magic alone. Ben looked at the narrator with genuine surprise and asked the question, "What then is mana?" Another participant in the feast entered the conversation, shouting about how it is possible not to know what mana is, and also not to know the basics of this world. Ben was surprised to realize that these basics are the usual standard knowledge of this world. Perhaps the master of the dark arts looked like a fool in this situation, but he could not do anything about it. He repeated that until recently he lived in a village, in the hope that the unknown would still be explained to him. The second guy who got into the conversation was called Gaston. He asked in which village the wanderer lived. Ben told him that the village was located behind Mount Trebark, which made the green-haired guy succumb to surprise. Both guys assumed that the wanderer was not lying to them. If he really lived in such an abandoned area, then his ignorance was not surprising. There was also a request addressed to Gaston to explain the basics to the traveler. Gaston, wide-eyed, began to explain that mana is the source of energy that moves this world. Every living creature has it to some extent. After all, an experienced warrior stores as much mana as possible in his body. A wizard can use his body as a storage facility to absorb the mana around him and turn it into a spell. Gaston explains that a normal person, using the mana necessary for life, can die. Also pointing out the blade, he said that the magic sword allows the use of magic, but if it is used by ordinary people, the blade will absorb too much mana and this will become a problem. As he absorbed the knowledge, Ben thought to himself that if there was mana in this world, it was the key energy he was using. Now, he understood why the blade absorbed it a little when he picked it up. There was also a dialogue in which the band noted that the blade looked quite light, despite its size, to which he received the answer that it had an automatic spell on it that would not have to be cast over and over again. But the most important thing is that these are manual spells. The guy extended his hand with a magic sword to the Banu, offering to try to cast the fire blade spell. Taking the blade in his hands, Ben cast the spell the guy had said. The surprise of the master of the dark arts knew no bounds. The sword immediately became red hot. It was something incredible, the band thought. Just a little energy for such an effect and without knowledge of the solar arts. The surprised master of the dark arts wondered if he could use other spells. The guy replied that the sword has a force shield that allows him to block arrows, and the blade is not expensive, but very useful. Ban's instincts are unparalleled. He immediately sensed danger, recognizing that an arrow was flying at him. The unperturbed swordsman decided to try out new knowledge and skills by actually using the force shield spell. The blade seemed to howl, surrounding Ban with an energy shield. No one had time to understand what actually happened. The wanderer cast a spell and out of nowhere, an arrow flew in and broke on the shield. The shooter exhaled. He couldn't understand what went wrong. The shot was right on target. Ben noted that the blade was very effective, asking the company if the sword had offensive magic. The guy told the wanderer that he needed to point the sword at the target and cast the fireball spell. At that same second, the Ban, having received the information, cast a fireball spell, pointing the blade in the direction in which the potential shooter was located. The spell had such destructive power. It was a high concentration of energy. A dark scarlet color darkened the room, then flew out the window. From what they saw, everyone in the pub was shocked by what was happening. There were so many questions and so few answers. The spell flew straight towards the attacker. Ben really took him by surprise. There was a powerful explosion not far from the pub, but it was unclear whether the Ban had missed. Apparently the shooter was having a lucky day. The master of dark arts thought to himself that this blade would be revered as a gift from heaven in the world of Nirim. But is this really a common thing here? The others at that time were watching the fleeing shooter. The comrades whispered among themselves. Gaston told Narek that he couldn't even imagine how much mana he needed to spend to create such a powerful fireball. Narek, in turn, whispered that he had never created such a destructive fireball in his life. During all the events, a girl appeared in front of the Ban, introducing herself as Mineria. She also noted that she was a servant of the earth goddess Kirs. Ben introduced himself by a name that was not familiar to him. He said that his name was Dark. She, in turn, noted that the arrow, apparently, was intended for him. The traveler replied that he was not sure of who and why, but only one face came to mind, and he also added with a grin that he did not remember doing anything bad recently that would force someone to come for him. Mineria suggested that then the arrow could have been intended for fair-haired Michael, who asked her in surprise why she had decided so. The girl added that if she had rushed past Dark and flew straight, then Michael would have become the target instead of the wanderer. The blonde guy says that too many people come to mind who could do this. Other comrades suggested catching up with the shooter, because with a wounded leg he would not run far, but one of them suggested that the attacker could be a member of the Thieves' Guild. This could become a real problem for them. Narek, as it turned out, was the most important in the group, so they turned to him for orders, and he, in turn, offered to go on a trip right now. The red-haired girl stopped the boss. Because Michael had a good reason to be delayed before leaving for Shannon, he had not yet finished his drink. The girl momentarily assumed the role of commander, and ordered everyone to hurry up in drinking ale and move out immediately. Michael suggested that if the attacker was from the Thieves' Guild, then this pub could be in danger. They could be surrounded at any moment. Narek gave the final order to prepare for a sortie and travel, avoiding a possible threat, and also added to everyone to make sure that they were properly armed. Ban, aka Dark, by coincidence he got a horse nicknamed the Black Death, moved after everyone, because his companions knew the way. And so the group, consisting of new comrades of the Master of the Dark Arts, set off on an adventure. On the way, Dark turned to Gaston, remembering his words that Gaston does not know how to use a sword, because he is a wizard. Why then is he so well armed? The comrade replied that this was all to hide the fact that he was a wizard, and in any case, wizards are always the primary target. Grinning, Ben replied that he understood what Gaston was talking about. On the way, Narek turned to Dark, remembering his words that he was 25 years old, adding that Ben was much younger. The leader thought that the swordsman was the same age as Jaime and Raven. Dark replied that he often hears this, thinking to himself that if he said that he was over 70 years old, then most likely he would look like a crazy person. Narek suggested that hunting monsters in the Trebark Mountains was quite profitable. For the first time he sees a novice traveler buying a horse. Following the route indicated by the boss, Dark and his comrades pass by the Imperial Knights. At that moment, the Narek ordered his horse to be quieter, because the stomping of the Artiodactyls made his horse nervous. Dark, in turn, did not miss the moment and managed to take a good look at the knights. The master of the dark arts noted the good equipment of the soldiers. Having passed by a column of warriors, the Narek told Dark that they were Baron Asmin, the son of the Baron and the master. The swordsman also wondered who the masters were. Michael, who picked up the dialogue, said that the masters are those who have mastered the flow of mana, adding that even in Corinth, the strongest empire, there are less than 1,000 of them, and in such a small empire as Trovia, there are 34. Dark's interest knew no bounds as to whether these masters were that good. Michael told him that of those 50 warriors, Baron Asmin is the only master, and this master can defeat the other 49 knights without much effort. The Dark, who continued his journey, riding on Black Death, did not understand anything from the story of fair-haired Michael. Turning around in search of answers, the master of the dark arts only looked contemptuously at the backs of the warriors. Knights, these third-rate ones weren't even close to the Dark's morning warm-up. So what's good about them? The swordsman asked an unanswerable question. Night fell in lands new to the master of the dark arts, and the company began preparing dinner. Mineria began pouring the stew strewn with various dishes. Perhaps in the future they will be able to become not only comrades, but also real friends. Who knows? But for now the whole team is content with dinner. But Narek and Michael are in no hurry. They are discussing something on the sidelines. The fair-haired man began the dialogue by saying that if the shooter really was from the Thieves' Guild, then they should set up an ambush here. The leader replied that it would be more difficult for them to attack them further from the city. Continuing the dialogue, the Narek noted that if the enemies come, then today, starting tomorrow, the leader plans to turn off the main road, but they will bump into monsters. Their dialogue was interrupted by Mineria, who called them to dinner. The thicket of the forest looks like an ideal shelter, but at the same time a very vulnerable location. There was a pair of legs hanging from a tree trunk, and surprisingly certain parts of the forest were well lit. Sitting on the tree was a green-eyed elf with a bow behind her back. She asked unknown people what exactly their enemy looked like. The fair-haired girl explained that the enemy had long black hair and was a little over 20 years old, dressed exclusively in traveler's clothes, without armor. Could this be the robber that Dark threw into the bay? Suddenly the elf with her own eyes was able to determine the approximate location of the target. It is possible that she could see something that others did not see. Perhaps it was her combat skills. She was able to determine that the distance to the target was about 400 meters. Is this really the person the blonde robber told about? The elf wondered. Dark's instincts never failed. It was as if he saw her too. Perhaps they even crossed glances. The elf thought about the same thing, or it just seemed to her. She looked down at her comrades, who had previously described Dark's skills as incredible, and speculation began. Because they did not know how skillfully Dark wielded a sword, but his skills in close combat were previously amazing. The blonde added that she could not do anything to him. The shooter added that it seems that Dark is also skilled in magic. He perfectly blocked his arrow with a magic shield and shot a fireball at him out of nowhere. The elf was very interested in the stories of her comrades, and she paid special attention to the ability of the fireball. It was already late at night. Almost the entire company was already asleep, because in the morning they had to continue their journey. Gustin was sitting by the fire, something that alarmed him. At the farthest point of the camp there was a Dark. The wizard turned to the swordsman with a proposal. Why not come closer and warm up by the fire? Dark showed no signs of attention, as if he had already had a third dream, but while sitting, Gustin noticed this. Had he really fallen asleep in this position, he thought? No matter how much he looked at him, he could not understand. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the whistle of an arrow rang through the thicket of the forest. The arrow flew straight into the Dark. But the master of the dark arts was always ready for anything, and with one sure movement of the blade separated the arrow. This arrow was not simple, it was enchanted by unknown magic. After being separated, pink runes appeared between the two halves. No one expected this. There was a loud explosion. One can assume that it was heard in all parts of the forest. Everyone immediately woke up. The Narek was in confusion. No one yet understood what was happening. The team grouped in a defensive position. The order was given for the priestess to heal the dark. The main task was to reveal the location of the attacker. Mineria bent over the prone swordsman and silently asked only that he would hold out until she cast the spell. But the dark cannot be broken so easily. With a sharp movement he lifted his body in an instant. Apparently only his clothes were damaged. The comrades told the swordsman not to strain himself, that the priestess would heal him. But the master of the dark arts replied that he was fine. Dark noticed that in reality only his clothes were damaged, but he still could not understand whether the arrow was actually endowed with magic. Gustin beat him to the punch, telling him that there were spells that could increase the killing power of an arrow. Without having time to finish speaking, Dark did not listen to the end of the wizard's words. Using a technique of great exaltation, he immediately soared upward. The elf saw the enemy approaching. She was so amazed by his devilish speed that she could not even determine the course of her further actions. Directed only forward, Dark did not care what danger might await him. According to his conceit, his combat experience was enough to defeat any enemy. The elf decided not to wait for the enemy to come close. She decided to shoot another arrow after her. But Dark was ready for anything. He used the illusory art of the rising sword. It was a technique that only masters of the dark school of arts possessed. The swordsman pointed his blade directly at the enemy's magical arrow. An explosion thundered, the destructive power of which exceeded the first. Most likely this explosion was heard not only in the forest, but also in the nearest cities. The elf did not understand whether she reached her goal, whether she managed to defeat her enemy. When Dark suddenly took her by surprise, pointing his blade directly at her, he looked as if he no longer intended to play her games. The elf, clearly trained in quite a few techniques, could not oppose anything to the speed of the Dark's approach. One moment, and he will be at his goal. Dark did not chop her into small pieces. With a powerful blow of his fist, thanks to his internal energy, he sent the elf into a deep sleep. Thanks to the technique of instantly assessing the situation, the master of the dark arts noticed that the enemy was not alone. Using his ability, he instantly sent a powerful stream of energy directly at the enemy who was below him. The second enemy fell very quickly, but, apparently, Dark calculated the amount of energy so as not to kill the enemy, but to neutralize him. Suddenly, a third enemy appears, a guy whose crossbow was pointed directly towards the master of the dark arts. The enemy fired a shot from the crossbow in the hope that he could finish off the swordsman. But with just one movement of the hand, the arrow, in which all the shooter's hope was invested, was caught. Confused, the robber had nowhere to go. He could not match anything with the devilish speed of the dark. Swinging his blade, the master of the dark arts was about to make his final attack. Swinging his blade, Dark was surprised that his opponent was able to dodge his incredibly fast strike. The enemy had no choice but to fall to his knees and hope for the best. The master approached him, beginning to closely examine him. Dark began to take off his clothes, thinking that since they had ruined his clothes, they should pay with their own. The master stopped at nothing. He even began to take off his opponent's pants. The guy, in turn, resisted. But he saw the grin of death, and as if there was no resistance, then the guy screamed with all his might, in the hope that at least someone would come to his aid. The scream reached the camp with his comrades. They were completely unaware of what was happening on the other side of the forest. Dark, who had changed clothes, began to interrogate the attacker about the reason for their attack, because he had not done anything bad to them. The bound but living opponents were in no hurry to answer the swordsman's question. Most likely they were hatching a plan to get out and try their luck again in defeating the master of the dark arts. The elf asked Dark a question, the essence of which was what the devil did the swordsman do to the guy with the crossbow that he shouted so loudly throughout the forest. The master of the dark arts replied that he didn't do anything to him, he simply turned off out of fear. It was so pathetic on the part of the guy that Dark looked at him only for a second, feeling disgusted. Jokes aside, Dark intends to be serious. He began asking the girls why they attacked him, offering to answer in a good way. Otherwise he would make them beg for him to kill them as soon as possible. The small blonde girl, gritting her teeth furiously, answered the swordsman that they attacked him because he attacked a member of the Vulcanian Thieves Guild and robbed her without even the knowledge of the Thieves Guild. To the rage of the pretty robber, Dark responded calmly that from the very beginning he had always felt safe, that he was safe and sound, and that a gang like them would never be a threat to him, adding that if this was indeed the true reason for the attack, then there was no point in killing them, to which the robber was very surprised. Defeated with one left hand, the elf insolently looked after Dark and said that he was too self-confident to not be afraid of the Thieves' Guild, which in certain parts of the earth had a certain power. The master of the dark arts thought about what the elf had said. Indeed, he thought, if he left them alive, they would try to find him again to kill him. With just one glance at the two tied-up girls, he made it clear that perhaps he had changed his mind about their future fate, which made them scream throughout the entire forest, screaming about what he would do with them. To their question, Dark grinned maliciously and replied that even he himself could not know what he would take into his head to do with them. Ban spared the thieves, taking away not their lives, but their clothes. But even with this outcome of the circumstances, the robbers were not happy, threatening Dark with violence. He answered them to hope that next time they would be dressed in something more expensive than trousers, and also adding that if they continue to threaten him, he will take away his underwear, after which the robbers instantly fell silent, because what would it be like for them to remain in the thicket of the forest, being tied up, without panties? Dark also took the horses and set off towards his camp, but the green-eyed girl still couldn't calm down, saying to herself that she would definitely kill the swordsman someday. The elf, thinking for a long time about what had happened, suggested not to try to kill him in the future, to which the enraged robber asked her how she could say such a thing, because the dark had discredited their honor and dignity. The elf added that the dark is too strong, revenge, of course, is good, but to face the truth, it is beyond their strength. Remembering just one look from the master of the dark arts, she felt uneasy and in the end she asked the robber a question about what kind of honor and dignity a thief could have, continuing to say that if she wanted revenge so much, let her continue. There was fear in the elf's eyes. Next time the dark might not show mercy, and might take away not their clothes, but their own lives. The victorious Dark was already on the threshold of the camp, and he also had 3 horses with him. It was still hard to see anything in the night, but in the shadows, Dark saw silhouettes familiar to him. These were his comrades. The whole team was surprised. Dark returned safe and sound, in different clothes, and also with horses. Anticipating questions from his comrades, the master of the dark arts said that these beauties belonged to those who would be hostile to him, continuing that the opponents simply tired of him, so he stole the horses. They asked Dark what he had done that, in the thicket of the forest in the middle of the night, an enchanted arrow suddenly whistled, aimed straight at him. The sword master told them a story that on the way to Vulcania one girl tried to rob him. In the background of the story the red-haired girl admired her pet, after which the Narek asked if Dark had reported the robbery to the guards. To which the master of the dark arts replied that he did not report anything to the guards, he only took her things and weapons, and then tied her up and threw her into the river. From what she heard the red-haired girl laughed very hard. Narek said that if the girl was a member of the Thieves' Guild, then this would be a problem for a long time, and also mentioned that this was far from the wisest thing that Dark did. To which the sword master replied to the leader that if it was really so dangerous, then he could continue the journey alone, so as not to impose himself on anyone. Michael entered the conversation and consoled Narek, telling him that he should not worry, because Dark had just taken an explosion and survived without a single scratch on him. Michael continued, adding that even if he is from the village, his durability is far superior to them and the Dark does not need their advice. The Narek agreed with the blonde-haired man's words. Yawning loudly, Michael suggested continuing to sleep. At this moment, Gaston felt multiple mana responses in another part of the forest. It was like a group of knights. He determined it by the quality of the mana. Surprised, Michael, already about to take a nap, asked how many there were, to which the wizard replied that it was a lot, about 50 or about 100. Narek was confused by this. Such a number of knights in such a place and at such a time. This was the first time in his memory that this had happened. Gaston, with his witchcraft abilities, felt that the battle had already begun, because the responses of the mana were gradually fading away. Mineria immediately threw her in the direction Gaston was looking at. Michael called her to understand what she wanted to do, to which the priestess replied that this was a battle between knights, that she must act immediately. Hurry, get to the battlefield as quickly as possible in order to heal the knights before they get hurt. To which Michael shouted after her that they didn't know anything. If she rushed there recklessly, then no one knows what could happen. The priestess was faster than ever. She hurried with all her might to have time to apply her healing knowledge to the wounded knights. Dark also kept up with her, perhaps because he could not leave his comrade alone on the battlefield. The rest hurried after them. If they didn't get drunk, then they all did. Dark noticed that the others were lagging behind. Most likely they were not keeping up because of the armor they were wearing. The sword master wondered whether he should take the priestess in his arms and rush quickly, because she could not keep up with him. The master of the dark arts instantly returned for the priestess, took her in his arms and accelerated onto the battlefield, focusing on the sound of the battle. The priestess fell to her knees at the first wounded warrior she came across. Dark analyzed what was happening behind the priestess. It looked like there was no one there to heal. Kneeling next to a mountain of corpses, the priestess screamed that these were the Rockin' Knights, and that there was no one left alive. Gaston, standing in a stupor, could not understand who could do this to the valiant knights, because they were different, but the Rockin' warriors were good. Narek at that very moment suggested that killing Rockin' Knights in the lands of Trovia was madness. Maybe it was a monster. The sound of the battle continued. The comrades noticed. They were still fighting there. They had to rush to help. Mineria noticed something strange. Looking at the mountain of corpses and equipment, it really didn't seem to her. Among this whole mountain of corpses, the green-eyed priestess also noticed one of the leaders of the knights. It was the dead Sir Alex Sedmian, whose eyes were filled with fear before his death. Suddenly, a silhouette appeared in front of the priestess. Undoubtedly it was a warrior, but it was unclear what clan he was. The warrior standing in a blue cloak with a huge blade looked contemptuously at the young priestess. Apologizing, he said that there should be no witnesses on this battlefield, and swung his huge sword at the defenseless Mineria. Narek looked straight into the eyes of the enemy who dared to swing at the girl without a weapon. His rage knew no bounds. He used advanced fireball magic to take the enemy by surprise, while the swordsman who swung at Mineria did not expect to see magic on the battlefield. The enemy quickly realized that she was dealing with a magic blade. He assumed that she was a mercenary, adding that with the advent of travelers, they only had more work. While the swordsman was analyzing the situation, he dropped out of reality for a moment. When he came to his senses, his gaze fell on the wizard. It was Gaston, who couldn't just sit back, somewhere on the sidelines. Mustering up his resolve, he came up with a plan. The enemy knights quickly realized that there was a wizard on the battlefield and this could well affect the outcome of the battle. As Gaston previously mentioned, the order was given to attack the wizard. Narek also gave the order to protect the wizard at all costs until he gained enough mana for a colossal ability. The priestess sparkled because bloodshed is not her method. If only she could influence anything. Light from heaven descended on the comrades. It was the magic of Mineria. The battlefield was illuminated by her angelic holy magic. For a second, the Narek thought that he would not like to fight with the knights, if not to take into account the fact that nothing could be changed, because the knights were trying to kill them, and then he rushed into battle. He clashed blades with one of the enemy warriors. Michael, in turn, took a more defensive position, using his shield against enemy swords. Dark, in the midst of a battle, only had time to analyze and notice that his allies were fighting much better than he expected, thinking for a second that maybe they would figure it out themselves. But not the entire squad fought on equal terms. Some were weaker. The knights did not forgive mistakes, so one of them, without missing a beat, knocked one of the allies to the ground. Looking at this, Ben realized that they couldn't cope without him. He would have to, because next to him were those comrades who accepted him into their company and started this journey together. At some point it was Dark's turn. Two men rushed at him with swords, but if only they knew who they were attacking. The master of the dark arts at such moments never managed without his natural, sometimes even frightening, grin. Suddenly, the battlefield was illuminated by a light, not the one that was angelic, thanks to the magic of the priestess. It was the light of a thunderclap, against the backdrop of which the dark looked more epic than ever. Behind all this was the wizard Gaston, who finally accumulated enough mana to use the terrifying technique of thunder and lightning. All the enemies on the battlefield were enveloped in chain lightning. The discharge was so powerful that it made no difference whether it was a natural phenomenon or the magic of a sorcerer. Its power was amazing. The opponents, hit by the divine chain lightning, did not even have time to blink an eye before they immediately evaporated. Gaston asked the Dark to buy him the maximum amount of time. Apparently he needed to recharge. To the wizard's request, the sword master replied that magicians are quite useful if they have a protector. The sorcerer can rely on him. Not realizing their own helplessness, the remaining knights did not stop trying to attack the master of the dark arts. But these attempts were in vain. There was a powerful explosion. It was none other than the famous fireball ability. She was released by Gaston, who was under the protection of the dark. From the outside one could say that this was absolute protection for the sorcerer. There was rage in the eyes of the knights. They were driven by revenge, because the battle did not last so long, and they were already suffering heavy losses. But no matter how many times they tried to attack the master of the dark arts, each of their attempts was unsuccessful. The dark pierced through the enemy soldier with one slight movement of his hand. The half-dead knight hanging on the blade of the sword master most likely did not even have time to understand anything. This was evident from his empty eyes. It is possible that in the end, he did not even understand why he died. At that moment, when the opponents looked around and tried to understand at what colossal speed they were suffering losses, none of them could even think that he was next on the death list. Thanks to the devilish speed of the master of the dark arts, he felt like a god on the battlefield. Because no one could resist him, he could easily be behind the enemy in a matter of moments to inflict fatal damage. At the moment of the attack, Dark could not understand what power he was using at that moment, whether it was ki energy or the local mana. But the result was always the same. The riddled opponents did not even have time to squeak, while the master of the dark arts inflicted damage on them that was incompatible with life. At one point on the battlefield, a frightened soldier called a master for help. But even among masters there are individual differences in skills and abilities, to which this master in a blue cloak said that this difference can be felt between him and Alex, who had just died a heroic death. The master in the blue cloak, who was initially hostile to travelers, also possessed magic. He could strengthen his sword. Could it really surpass the dark in strength? The master of the dark arts quickly realized that the enemy strengthened the sword not with the help of mana, but with the help of ki energy, which was developed by special techniques and training, the sages of Mirima. The enemy disappeared from the band's field of vision. The speed of the executioner's movements was slightly inferior to the devilish speed of the dark. Swinging in the air, the enemy shouted that he had never heard of a master using a saber. The master of the dark arts could expect any action from the enemy based only on his combat experience. And naturally, Dark's invincible grin is to catch the enemy off guard, or he really is that confident in himself. The enemy noticed the band's smile, while delivering his signature blow, as if a guillotine was descending on a person's head, not seeing any obstacles and crushing the earth. But what a surprise the big executioner was when, after his counter-offensive, only a small fragment in the form of a handle and blade remained from his blade. With one sure swing of his sword, the master of the dark arts repels the enemy's attack. Is there really no equal to him in these lands? His speed, his strength. The second part of the executioner's blade stuck out in the nearest tree. If this had been a busy battlefield, then the scattered remains of his sword could well have taken with it a couple of lives of his subjects. The master of dark arts, observing the enemy, thought that the executioner was about as strong as a first-class knight from the Black Death Squad. Is this really all that the great master of this world can offer? Possessing demonic speed, Dark, using the great elevation technique without any problems, stood with one foot on the head of the local master, who did not even have time to blink an eye. The grin of the master of the dark arts could not be avoided. He was annoyed that this was all that such a huge opponent, occupying a leading position in his squad, was capable of. Having realized the severity of what was happening, the master in a blue cloak understood that his opponent was standing on his head, but he did not feel his weight. The master of the dark arts, known in the New World as Dark, used the 1000-weight punishment technique, which he had been taught at the School of Demonic Arts, against his arrogant opponent. The rest of the knights, one might say, witnessed the moment of execution of their master, who died in the blink of an eye. Looking with demonic eyes at the remaining opponents, Dark said that with such inferior skills and techniques, they committed a grave sin by targeting the great master. The remaining knights did not even have time to move when the master of the demonic school used, this time not a smashing whirlwind, but a bloody hurricane of death. Dark, having defeated the others at once, analyzed the situation on the battlefield. There were no survivors, everything seemed to be in order, with the exception of Jimmy, who was knocked to the ground first. Narek noticed that after that master died, the morale of all the other soldiers fell. He also assumed that he was a captain. Priestess Mineria stood in bewilderment at what was happening. On the one hand they crushed the enemies, on the other hand she was so eager to help that she almost ended up being beheaded by an executioner in a blue cloak. Michael suggested that the young priestess forget about the details. The main thing is victory without losses against the knights led by the master. Having exchanged glances with the Narek, he looked in his eyes for words of support for everything he had listed above, to which the leader replied that to some extent luck had accompanied him in this battle, adding that the enemy was either tired or wounded. Unexpectedly for everyone, Dark sharply used the elevation technique and rushed to the side. No one understood the course of his actions. As it turned out, apparently, there was still one last enemy left. He was casting some kind of unknown mana, as if it was not local mana. Rushing into battle, the master of the demonic school was not afraid of anything, but it would be worth being careful with sorcerers until it became clear what technique the enemy was using, because in this battle Gaston distinguished himself from others with his skills and proved that sorcerers are not to be trifled with.